Many familiar foods come from the Rosaceae plant family. Raspberries, strawberries, apples, pears, peaches, plums, almonds, the list goes on. Springtime is when this family alerts to its presence in both urban and natural landscapes with its characteristic showy flowers. If you're looking to locate them in your area, there's no easier time of year to distinguish them from other trees. Identifying a tree as a member of the rose family during bloom is relatively straightforward thanks to those distinctive flowers. But narrowing it down to the genus or exact species, that's where things can get tricky. If you've ever wondered how to tell a plum tree from a cherry tree, or how to separate crab apples from hawthorns, this video will help. First, I'll give an overview of 5 tree genera in the Rosaceae family, highlighting key traits for telling them apart. Then, we'll head into the field and take a look at 13 species that occur in the upper Midwest. A couple of quick caveats: I'll be focusing only on trees and shrubs, no brambles or herbaceous plants like raspberries and strawberries. Also, I'm exploring in the Chicagoland area, which is representative of the upper Midwest, but if you're in a different region, some ID keys may vary. Finally, this video focuses on species growing in the wild. I won't be covering landscaping varieties, though I will include enough info to help you place those in the correct genus if you're curious. So let's begin by reviewing 5 genera of wild Rosaceae trees and shrubs that occur in the upper Midwest: Prunus, Amelanchier, Crataegus, Malus, and Pyrus. Prunus is the most distantly related of the 5, meaning it shares a common ancestor with the others further back in time. Morphologically, it's also unique. Prunus flowers have a superior ovary, whereas the other 4 genera have inferior ovaries. I'll show you this difference later with some flower dissections. Another thing to note, Prunus has variable inflorescence types, and the flowers always have a single style. The other genera tend to stick with one inflorescence type, but the number of styles can vary among species. I'll show examples later on. While Prunus stands out morphologically, Amelanchier is arguably the easiest to identify in the field. Look at the bark. Amelanchier has smooth, grayish bark from trunk to twig. It also never has thorns, unlike some of the others. One more standout feature is its narrow flower petals, which are typically more than twice as long as they are wide. In contrast, Crataegus is notable for its prominent thorns. While Malus, Pyrus, and Prunus may also have thorns, they're typically less numerous and imposing. Landscaping cultivars of Crataegus may lack thorns, but in the wild they're always present. Crataegus also features a corymbose inflorescence, a helpful clue, especially if you're looking at a thornless cultivar. Again, I'll show inflorescence types later. Unlike Crataegus, Malus has an umbelliform inflorescence. Other traits to keep in mind for Malus are its flower petals often start out pink, it tends to have a crooked trunk, and its styles are united at the base, which is a key difference from Pyrus. There are no native Pyrus species in North America, but some do occur in the wild. Like Malus, Pyrus also has an umbelliform inflorescence. However, its flower petals are always white, and its styles are free at the base, a detail I'll cover more closely later on. With these high-level notes in mind, let's head out into the field and take a closer look at these trees and shrubs in action. So I'm going to be filming the field portion of this video over the course of the next month or two. And that's because these plants all bloom at different times. So we're going to start off here with one of the first ones that tends to bloom. So one of the first traits that we see here right away is that it has ascending branching. See how the branches want to go up and not outward. So if we just stop with that clue and the fact that this is one of the first plants that's blooming, which can mean that it is invasive. Oftentimes invasive plants are the first to leaf out, and that's how they kind of gain an advantage over the natives. These 2 traits alone point this to being Pyrus calleryana, a really bad invasive that's moving its way north, and it's a huge problem. But let's go ahead and examine some of the details just to make sure that this is the correct ID. Whoops. Well, that's actually another clue, the fact that this tree is super brittle. Some other traits to note, we can see that it's flowering just before it's leafing out. And maybe the other thing we can see on here is that the leaf margins are very finely serrated. Maybe even finely scalloped would be the right word. Now, taking a closer look at the inflorescence here, what we see is they are in bundles of roughly about 10 here. It can vary with callery pear, but 10's a good average number, I'd say. And you would describe this inflorescence as umbelliform, meaning it's similar to an umbel. Now, an umbel just means that the different flower stalks all kind of emerge from the same point. And as we look closely, that's not exactly what's going on here, but this more resembles an umbel than it does a raceme or a corum. So that's why we say umbelliform. The petals are all white, and they get to about 3/4 of an inch wide, which would be about 2 centimeters. And looking at the flower parts themselves, notice that the flowers have 2 styles. This tree can rarely have 3, but most often it's going to be 2. Another thing to check just to make sure it's Pyrus is to see if it's got an inferior ovary. Now, if you dissect a flower that hasn't been fertilized yet, the ovary location isn't super easy to make out. Here we can see that the style is kind of going down and disappearing into that green schmutz. And that means that the ovary is beneath or inferior to where the flower parts all kind of come together. Now, there is another way to see if a plant has inferior or superior ovary, and that's by seeing if we can find any of the old fruits. Okay, here we got some old fruits. Notice, I mean, even though this is a pear, these are pretty small fruits. Notice on the opposite side of the fruit from the stem, there's that little circular pit right there. And that is evidence that there used to be some floral remnants there. A more familiar example of this is an apple, and you can see that it's got some floral remnants on it. If we contrast this with a fruit that's from a plant with a superior ovary, such as this plum, you'll see on the side that's opposite from the stem, there is no pit or any floral remnants. And that is the sign of a superior ovary location. And one more trait that's very diagnostic for callery pear is these spiny branch shoots. Sadly, we still find callery pear in the city quite prominently. There are a few states that have banned it, but Illinois has not yet. But still, shame on any nurseries that are still selling it. I mean, come on. One last thing about the callery pear is that it has an unpleasant fragrance. Now, not every tree is going to have a fragrance, but for the ones that do, the smell is unpleasant. We'll fast forward 5 days, and now we've got a new tree that's blooming. This one is forming little colonies, little thickets in here. Right away I knew this wasn't another callery pear, just because it has 2 or 3 flowers per bundle rather than the usual around 10 of callery pear. You could describe this plant as a suckering shrub or a small tree, and its branching is both spreading and ascending. The trunk has a gray bark, and the larger branches are gray and smooth with some lateral lesions. And this tree has some spiny branchlets. Getting a closer look at the inflorescence, we can see it's umbelliform. Again, 2 to 3 flowers per bundle, but some are occurring singly. The literature says it can have as many as 5 or 6 flowers per bundle, but I'm seeing mostly 2 and 3. White petals, and very importantly, we can say that these flowers are all exceeding 1.2 centimeters across. That'll be important when we differentiate it from another plum. And then the leaves here, we can pick up on a couple characteristics. The margin is serrated, and the surface is kind of indented or kind of wrinkly. Dissecting the flower, we can confirm a superior ovary location and one style, which pretty much confirms it's a Prunus. And we also want to get a close look at the calyx here. We can see that the sepals have entire margins. They are a bit pubescent and they are green throughout. I saw one author describe this plant as having an unpleasant fragrance. That is not my opinion. I think it's got a pretty nice fragrance. Not sure why Prunus americana isn't used in landscaping more. It's got an interesting form and attractive flowers and fruits. So there is another species of plum that leaves out early as well, and it's very rare in the Chicagoland region. It only occurs in the far southern district. This here is the chickasaw plum. Well, right off the bat, what jumps out here is this can be described as a colonial shrub. It's very much thicket forming, especially here in this sunny spot. Very twiggy. And also, I could smell a very pleasant fragrance from a long way away from this thicket. And then the other thing that jumped out is it has really small white flowers. They're mostly 2 to 3 per bundle, maybe more often 3. And importantly, for distinguishing it from Prunus americana, we can see that the flowers are not more than 1.2 centimeters across. Getting a close look at the calyx, we can see the sepals are pubescent with entire margins. And they are mostly green, maybe some tinctures of red. Then it has gray and reddish branching with some thorny side branches. And then the leaves, they're more finely serrated than Prunus americana. And you can't really tell now, but they're more narrow. That's what angustifolia means, narrow leaves. This plant normally occurs much further south, and it's common from like Kansas through Alabama, Georgia region. Here in the Chicagoland area, it's only found here in this sand prairie habitat. And now here, another early bloomer, we have the easiest of our 5 genera to identify. On a large tree like this, you can look no further than the smooth gray bark on the trunk and all the branches. The other main giveaway is the long and narrow flower petals, typically more than twice as long as they are wide. The inflorescence is a raceme. You can see it's pubescent. And the calyx is green and red, and the pedicels are all red. Here's the long white flower petals. If we look real closely at the flower here, we can see 5 styles. And that's a trait of Amelanchier, having 5 styles. Then dissecting the flower here, the ovary location, it's not immediately obvious for Amelanchier. You might mistake it as a superior ovary because we can clearly see the tip of it. But notice the bottom is buried below the hypanthium. It's actually much easier to make out the inferior ovary location on a fertilized flower. So this one is Amelanchier arborea. I know that because the top of the ovary is mostly hairless, and then the flowers are all appearing before the leaves. And these young leaves are exceptionally hairy, especially on the undersides. There are a few other species of Amelanchier that occur in the area, but I'll go ahead and stop with this one. Smooth gray bark and long narrow flower petals are all you really need for an Amelanchier ID among Rosaceae. This one is a cultivar, but it might be found out in the wild. So I happen to know this one is an Asian pear just because I saw the fruits last summer. But it can certainly occur in the wild with people discarding the core after eating them. See, it has gray bark and gray branching. The leaves and the flowers are kind of emerging together, still an umbelliform inflorescence here. These leaves are sharply serrated. They have an ovate shape, meaning they're widest below the middle, and they taper to a short point at the end. And these young leaves are very hairy, tomentose you would say. The flowers are remarkably large, at least 3 centimeters across, and they're really long pedicels. And we have pubescent sepals that are mostly green, maybe fringed with some red. And the inferior ovary location is pretty easy to make out on this fertilized flower here. Now, dissecting the flower and looking real close, it looks to have 5 styles, maybe 4, I think 5. And see, the thing that separates Pyrus and Malus here is that the styles are free at their base with Pyrus. You see that? Fast forward 5 days and we're at about the middle of the season now, I'd say. And one of the trees that starts to bloom at this time is our domestic apple tree. These occur spontaneously in the wild all the time, but I'm here at a park. It's just gonna be easier for me, and I'm gonna pick up less ticks by showing you one at a park. So keeping with my theme of featuring trees found in the wild, the only other Malus species I'll be taking a look at in this video are 2 crab apples that are native to the area. I'll not be looking at any of the numerous crabapple cultivars that you can find in landscaping. So with that out of the way, let's get a closer look at this domestic apple. First we see the telltale crooked trunk of Malus. The bark is thin and reddish gray. The leaves on this tree appear before the flowers, and they are very finely serrated, and important to note, evenly serrated. That'll be important when we differentiate from the native crab apples. The flowers are relatively large. They start off pinkish and turn white pretty quickly. The pedicels and the sepals are hairy. And here I'll point out, if you see a pedicel that's longer than 2.5 centimeters, then you've got another species. I'm going ahead and dissecting the flowers. We can see that it has 5 styles and they are united at their base. Moving on, here we have the 3rd and final species in this region that produces plum-like fruits. But I am going to have a difficult time looking at the flowers with this individual. Such an interesting growth form. It just buddies up next to these 2 red oak trees and finds its little bit of daylight. Unlike americana and angustifolia, which prefer open sunny locations, this plum can also be found in the middle of a woodland among heavier foliage. Chicago is at the southwestern range limit of this species, and it is uncommon around here. Compared to the other plums, it has wider leaves, and these appear after the flowers, and the margins are doubly serrate. The bark is smooth and dark reddish brown with some white lenticels on the younger trees. Plenty of thorny spur twigs. Looking closer at the flowers, the calyx is said to be sparsely pubescent, but it can appear to be glabrous. What makes it different from the other plums is that the calyx here is very reddish, and then the margins of the sepals have glandular teeth. The flowers themselves are also slightly bigger than americana, and they smell good. Also important to note is that they most often appear in bundles of 3 to 5. So if you're seeing bundles of 2 a lot, then that's a good chance you're looking at another species. And here we have another mid-season bloomer. This one likes borders, edges, clearings, likes a lot of sun, and it tends to occur along roadsides quite a bit, as it is here. This species is scarce around Chicago, other than here in the Dunes region. It's more common to the north. And as we can see here, it's a sprouting small tree or shrub. The most striking characteristic is the loose, reddish-brown bark and shiny branches. Very attractive. Some of the lenticels have an orange color to them. The literature varies between 2 and 7 on the number of flowers per bundle, but I'm seeing mostly 5 here. The leaf margins have uneven, rounded teeth and appear to be glabrous throughout. And we see the calyx is glabrous and the sepal margins entire. And you combine these traits with small flowers and good chance you have a fire cherry. If you were to combine these traits with larger flowers, then you probably have an introduced species, and then you'd have to look at the sepals to narrow down which one. Moving on, we have a member of Rosaceae that really likes this good view. This is another species that produces cherry fruits and occurs in sandy habitats, and it can be found growing very close to the shore here along Lake Michigan. It's a multi-stemmed shrub, and notice the ends of the branches, or the branchlets, are strongly ascending. The flowers occur in bundles of 2 to 4 and are very similar to the fire cherry. They're small, the calyx is glabrous, and the sepal margins are entire. What differentiates the flowers is the length of the pedicels are shorter than what you'd see on fire cherry. And then the leaves, we see they are narrow and finely serrated with oppressed teeth. And they are glabrous, and the underside is more pale than the top side. Next, we have a forest understory tree. This is our first meeting with Crataegus in this video. This genus is pretty easy to identify because of its prominent thorns. Oh, hey there, fly buddy. Coming to see how these thorns mean business. The other easy giveaway for Crataegus is that its inflorescence is a corymb. See how the pedicels are all different length to render the inflorescence with a flat top? Looking at the leaves here, we see they are sharply serrated or double serrated, and they are covered in hairs. Where the leaves and the flowers emerge, everything is very sticky and glandular. The fragrance is a tad unpleasant, I would say. The sepals have very conspicuous glandular teeth, and the calyx is quite hairy. Getting a close look at the flower, it has spreading petals, and the anthers are a whitish or a creamy color. Then dissecting the flower, we can confirm an inferior ovary, and we can really see how densely hairy everything is. The bark on this tree is gray-brown, and it's divided into scaly plates. I believe this is Crataegus Malus. Not only do all the traits match, Malus will bloom earlier than other Crataegus species, which as a whole are more late-season bloomers. Now, Crataegus is notoriously hard to ID by species, so I'll probably just stop here with this one. Again, the prominent thorns and the corymb inflorescence are the main distinguishers for Crataegus. So earlier when I was showing you the domestic apple, I had aims of showing you 2 wild crab apples that are native to the area. However, all the native crab apples I can find all have the exact same characteristics. I'm just finding one species. I'm not finding the other one. The one that I'm finding differs from the many introduced crab apples by having leaves with shallow lobes and coarsely dentate margins, rather than being evenly serrated. Another giveaway that it's a native is there are a good number of thorns on the branches. So I'm presuming this is Malus because of the large flowers and the petals starting off pink, and the crooked trunk. But let's dissect a flower to make sure the styles are united at the base. Sure enough, they are. We also see the inferior ovary location. The flowers themselves are relatively large, and they have a nice fragrance. They appear in bundles of 2 to 6. I believe Malus ioensis is what we're seeing here. The other native, Malus coronaria, might start off with some hairs on its leaves and its calyx and pedicels, but it goes away quickly after emerging, and everything becomes glabrous. These 2 species are very similar aside from this. Ioensis happens to be the most common in this area, and coronaria is more common to the east. Fast forward a few days, and now our late season bloomers are getting started. This species is a tree that can attain heights of 80 feet. On mature specimens, the bark is an easy distinguisher. It's dark and has scaly, irregular plates that flip upward. Some say it looks like potato chips. The inflorescence is a raceme that can have more than 20 flowers. And to distinguish from that other species, we can look at the leaves, which are narrow and tend to be more than twice as long as they are wide. And they have finely toothed margins where the teeth are curving inward. Another trait with cherry leaves is they often have these two glands on the petiole, right near the base of the leaf. The individual flowers are pretty small and have a bit of an unpleasant fragrance. And then looking at the inside of the flower, we see the superior ovary and the single style. Black cherry is a very common tree in the eastern US. It can become weedy, and some people consider it a nuisance, but it has tremendous wildlife value. I've read across its range it hosts over 450 species of butterflies and moths. And if you compare that to the invasive callery pear, which hosts just one species here in North America, and you can appreciate why we want to help out our natives. And next we have our other Prunus that can produce racemes of 20 or more flowers. Chokecherry is closely related to black cherry, but it's more of a shrub or a small tree, and it has a more northerly distribution. The trunk bark is grayish brown and smooth with prominent lenticels. The leaves have these two glands right at the end of the petiole, just like the black cherry, but they differ from black cherry by being wider and by having margins with teeth that point straight out instead of curving inward. Looking close at the inflorescence, again it is a raceme that can have more than 20 flowers, and the centers of the flowers are noticeably yellow. And looking at the individual flowers, the calyx and the sepals are mostly yellow, which is why the centers are so yellow. And dissecting, we see the superior ovary and single style. The inflorescence on chokecherry is very similar to black cherry, but its shrubby growth habit and the leaf margins with straight teeth set it apart. I was glad to track down all the native Prunus species in the area, 4 cherries and 3 plums in total. While Prunus is more diverse further south, this represents the full range you'd expect to find in the upper Midwest. For Amelanchier, 5 native species occur in the region, but since telling them apart isn't especially straightforward or relevant for most people, I focused on the most common one. Crataegus is notoriously difficult to ID by species. There are around 18 natives here depending on the latest taxonomic updates, and they hybridize frequently. Covering each one of them would have been an ambitious and probably overwhelming task. With Malus, I was only able to find one of the 2 native species, but I took the opportunity to show how its leaves compare to those of domestic apples and the many cultivated varieties. And for Pyrus, there are no native species in North America. I reviewed the highly invasive callery pear and one kind we buy in grocery stores that can occasionally establish in the wild from discarded fruit. Once again, spring is by far the easiest time to locate these trees and shrubs in the wild, thanks to their distinctive blooms. Many of them produce edible fruits, but just a quick reminder to never eat the pits. They contain a compound that your body can convert into cyanide, which is toxic even in small amounts.